here from Avion Technology here in the Chicagoland area. We are a web design development company. We have been around since 2007. So I've been doing this since the last 16 years. Within this time, I have seen the 2008 recession. I have seen, what else have I seen? I have seen the pandemic. I've seen the Russian conflict right now. I've seen the whole crypto bubble. I've seen tons of government shutdowns. So today's topic is actually about something called as VUCA, right? That's volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and anarchy. So I was born in the 70s, and like a lot of so let me just set up a context for this video. So at Avion Technology here, we work in three silos, or we work in three areas. The first is we create MVPs, right? That's minimum viable products for folks who have a startup idea, and so we help them go to market. The second area that we work in is actually for a lot of digital agencies who are usually in the 250,000 to 500,000 kind of annual revenue. So we help them scale up. And the third area that we work in is in digital marketing for a lot of local small businesses. So today's topic is kind of related to all three of these, right? Which is how do you navigate in a VUCA world? Like I said, I grew up in the 70s. I was born in the 70s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And what a lot of us, those who have been born after the Second World War, people who were born in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, what we do not realize is that we grew up with a very stable model of the world, right? But that kind of lasting peace, if you look at the history of humanity, the kind of peace that we've had in the last 50, 60 years, that's actually been an exception than the norm. That's been the anomaly. The world has always been very volatile. The world has always been very violent. The world has always been very chaotic. So really, this post-pandemic world that we're in, it's not the exception. It's the norm, right? We are a generation that has kind of been pampered because we grew up in an environment where there was a lot of structure, right? And when that structure, like the US dollar, for example, right? We always assume the greenback to kind of be worth its weight in gold. We always assume that the greenback would always be there. Or America's sovereign rating, right? As a AAA, it's AAA bond rating, right? We never thought that our federal government would be close to a shutdown because we can't afford to pay the employees of the US government can't afford to pay its bills. Never thought about that growing up. So I think in the 2008 recession, we actually flirted with a financial Armageddon, right? With a financial catastrophe. I think the world was very close to a financial meltdown back in 2008. And we kind of navigated our way through that by doing some financial alchemy. But that probably just kicked the can down the road. And the world that we're seeing after the pandemic is going to be the world which is going to be here for a long time. So how do small business owners, right? How do small digital agencies and startup entrepreneurs and small businesses kind of cope with this, right? With this uncertainty. So I have a few insights into this, right? I think the first thing we have to do is accept the uncertainty paradigm. We've been raised in our MBA classes with this paradigm of continuous, and not just continuous, but continuous steady and exponential growth, right? A lot of it was largely driven by demographics, right? After the 1960s, because healthcare outcomes improved for the world, and child mortality outcomes improved for the world. The world's population exploded, and so riding on the back of all those demographic changes, uh, was the economic growth, right? But as the world's population grows at a slowing pace, right? So the world's population is no longer growing at the pace at which it was back in the 70s and 80s, right? As sub-Saharan countries and countries in Africa and Asia, there's a little bit of trickle-down effect, and they start getting a little richer, and their per capita, income starts going up. The fertility rates start going down, and there's less infant mortality and all that. So the population growth of the world has started decelerating. And so a net effect of that is that growth has started decelerating, right? And the net effect of that is that these crazy asset bubbles that we had, that we're so used to, right? These stock market booms and the internet boom and the crypto boom, we're not going to have a lot of that. We're not going to see these crazy asset valuations. We're no longer going to be in a 7% kind of growth paradigm. And so one of the first things we as business owners have to understand, that survival is the new normal, right? Even if you can survive, and even if you can kind of grow at a 5 or 4 or 5% growth rate, you're doing good, right? You're doing well. I think that's the first thing you got to kind of etch somewhere in a little a little diary or somewhere, that if you've gone through the pandemic, and if you've been through the years thereafter, without taking a lot of damage, you've done well, so you should be happy about that. I think the second thing that a lot of business owners have to reconcile with is that they are going to have a few quarters in a year, or a few years in a decade, which are going to be a step backwards, right? And so again, it goes back to this exponential curve that I mentioned, which we were so used to in the past, where everything grew at a predictable clip, and I think that's not going to be there anymore. In fact, we're going to have a lot of peaks and valleys, right? Where you're going to have a lot of times fueled by the Fed, and central banks, where they're putting in all this liquidity in the economy, and so there's it's almost like giving blood to a patient who's in the ICU, and the patient, like, for a few days he's like up and lively, and then once the blood goes, he's like back in his morbid state, right? So that's how the economy is going to be, where we're going to have a few good years followed by these semi depressions. So be ready for the proverbial one step back for your business, right? And that's normal, right? Everywhere in nature that you see, there is a hibernation. There is a period of rest and recover. Nothing in nature grows continuously all the time, except cancer, right? So for a business, for an organization to actually take one step back, to recover, to be in a rest mode for like 3 months in a year, to reorient themselves, to set new targets, that's extremely normal, and it's healthy, right? So that's the first thing, in the VUCA world, that you guys, if you're an agency owner or whatever, you should realize that just because you've had a bad quarter does not mean that you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? It's okay. That's number one. The second thing that I would advise a lot of small business owners is, no matter what the state of the greenback is, and no matter how high inflation is, I think when I'm speaking right now, the Fed's rate is at about a 5.5%. So that's pretty high in terms of traditional inflation numbers in the US. But nothing beats cash, right? So I went to college in the dot-com boom, where, people had an IPO just on the basis of an idea, right? I knew friends of friends who who had bought stocks in some crazy company whose name you could not even pronounce, and they were millionaires, and that didn't last long, right? Because that's a party, and parties don't last forever, right? You have to go home at some point. And so the dot-com boom ended badly, right? And these typically are like Ponzi schemes, right? The ones who get in early make the money, and they're smart, and they make the exit, and it's the folks down below who kind of always suffer. And more often than not, if you're an outsider, you are down below, right? So yeah, when I was in my 90s in my college, I saw that whole internet boom. Then when I graduated and started my own business, there was the real estate and the subprime boom, and that didn't end well. And now we have the crypto boom, and that did not end well, right? So I think if you are in your 30s and if you're in your 40s, you're running a digital agency, please invest in conservative instruments, right? You have money market accounts, you have municipal bonds, you have AAA rated corporate bonds, or what I like the most is buy a Vanguard total bond market fund, right? Don't chase returns, right? The best feeling in the world is to have 5-10 months of expenses sitting somewhere in cash. And I think that's the best antidote, that's the best medicine for this VUCA world, right? When there's so much instability, when there's so much chaos, and everything's kind of AI, right? People are freaking out over AI. 10 years from now, we don't even know if there's going to be doctors around. That, I mean, that's hyperbole, but still, it's a real, I wouldn't say threat, but it's a real paradigm shift, right? So if you're an agency owner, you're definitely going to get affected at some point, right? So many jobs are being lost. Content writers are losing their jobs to ChatGPT. So our businesses are going to change for sure in the next 10 years, right? And what's kind of going to safeguard you, and what's going to kind of be a moat for your agency is the cash that you have in times like these, because it's the cash that gives you sustaining power. It's the cash that kind of buffets you against the bad times, right? It gives you that mind space where you can make pivots. The third thing, so the first thing I mentioned in a VUCA world is, like I said, it's okay to have one bad quarter, right? You can almost expect to have one bad quarter in a year, right? The second, I would say, is that, like I said, have at least 5 to 10 months of cash, or some cash-like instrument. The third thing would actually be leadership, right? Nature by itself means chaos. If what makes us human, or what gives us, the reason why we have societies and economies which function is a structure, right? And that structure is not something intangible or mythical or esoteric. That structure is given by people, right? And you need leadership to make anything function, right? So again, as a humanity, and even for your business, I think that the vaccine, or the safeguard against a world full of volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and anarchy is the leadership that you have within your organization. Their ethics, their work ethic, their values, their culture. I think one thing that separates us human beings from a lot of the other animals is the concept of delayed gratification, right? And frankly, that's something that a lot of millennials struggle with, right? Millennials are folks who have been raised on iPhones and TikToks. An idea that they struggle with is that the gratification has to be instant. where leadership is all about delayed gratification. What is delayed gratification, right? It's essentially the joy or the pleasure going to get out of something today, compounded by time, right? So I was reading somewhere, it's the difference between going to a beach versus owning the beach, right? So make sure you have a leadership pipeline within your organization, and that's going to be the biggest safeguard, the biggest guardrail for a small business owner in this new world that we're living in. I think that, if you ask me personally, I think the world is going to be okay. You know, there have been so many times, right, where everyone thought this is going to be the end of the world, but humanity has an amazing way. Humanity has this amazing survival instinct. We have this amazing ability to kind of come together when it's a question of the survival of us and our offspring. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. The actors might be different. So we are used to a world order where you had US, UK, France. I don't know. I mean, there were a certain number of people who were at the center stage 100 years back. There might be those people plus a few more others on the stage this time. But I think on the whole, human beings survived because at some point in our evolution we realized that collaboration is better than competition. And so I think in this new VUCA world, we will learn to collaborate better, and we might actually have much better outcomes with a lot of these big challenges, more than what anyone else thought. So again, I'm sorry, that was a long lecture, but just my thoughts on how small business owners can navigate the new 21st century world. If you like this, please press on the like button. This is our email. This is our phone number. Give us a shout. Thank you so much.